Growing up as a young Brit, I would get in from a hard day playing Curbsy, I'd flick on the TV, and I would step foot into a portal that led me to another world. A world where kids didn't wear school uniform. They had massive homes with swimming pools. They were eating Big Macs for lunch. In this same world, heroic American soldiers saved the day, and good would always be evil. Now, at the time I didn't know it, but I was being raised on a very carefully curated story. A story that imprinted beliefs and attitudes upon me without my knowledge. I was being indoctrinated by American propaganda.
What makes America the greatest country in the world?
To the flag of the United States of America.
So, my friends, I want you to grab your copy of the American Constitution. I want you to flick to the first page. What does it say? Freedom of expression, right? Americans fucking love freedom. They love free speech. And this is definitely true, of course. But what if there was like some people who made films and those films sort of like questioned certain American ideals? That would be a little bit awkward. So America had to do something, right? And it kind of started around about World War I. Newspaper, radio, and films were increasingly becoming tools that pushed messages that the government didn't really have full control over. In 1917, when America joins the war, they needed to get public support for the war effort. But Americans didn't like the concept of propaganda. It was seen as like un-American, a symbol of like pompous European monarchs, and they wouldn't accept films that were paid for and obviously pushing a political propaganda message. And so the Americans had a really good idea. What if we don't call it propaganda, but instead we create a committee on public information, the CPI. So it wasn't no way, not propaganda, CPI, baby. The CPI would, go through newspapers, magazines, posters, cartoons, radio broadcasts, public speeches, and very crucially, films. They would put their pro-World War I messages into these things to influence the minds of Americans. And the message was pretty straightforward. The war is righteous, your freedoms are under threat, and it's your duty to report dissent. And so Hollywood, already booming, was now pumping out pro-war films on the request of the government. And this would be the groundwork that would realize the power of cinema to influence the way people thought. Okay, so now it's like the 20s and 30s, and Hollywood has this kind of image problem. The celebrities are sort of like a little bit naughty, dying of drug overdoses, having sex scandals and affairs, and even murders, and these things were going all across the newspapers. Meanwhile, the films themselves were a little bit risque. I'm talking gangsters, sexual innuendo, even jokes about religion. And so a growing concern from the sort of free speech and liberty-loving Catholic and Protestants who began to campaign against Hollywood for being immoral, saying that they're using the medium of film to corrupt the youth. And so there was a real movement pushing for censorship laws. Hollywood did not want to be under the thumb of the big man, right? They didn't want to have to abide by regulations. It's very complicated. So they made an agreement, a silent agreement, and they created their own industry watchdog, unofficially called the Hays Code. So all of the major studios and their owners came together and created a list of rules that they enforced over the entire media industry. These rules include no sexual perversion, which means gay people, no gays, no interracial romance. You can have a little bit of violence, but not too much violence. Obviously, you can't mock religion or clergy members. And also, you can never be sympathetic to criminals. Criminals are always irredeemable. And so what came out was you're only allowed to make films that were moral, clean, patriotic, pro-American, where good triumphs evil and traditional values reign supreme.
The Legion had something called the Legion Pledge, and you have 20 million Catholics that would stand up, raise their hand, and pledge that they would not attend motion pictures that the church deemed unworthy and unholy.
So basically, the studios would have to submit their films for approval. And if the film didn't get approved, then the distributors just wouldn't make the film. And so, in the land of the free, political censorship of Hollywood had begun. Now, I could do a whole bit about how America was willingly letting Nazis come over and regulate American films so that they could be shown in Nazi Germany, like removing Jewish people and stuff. I could do that, but we'll skip it because eventually America would have to break its love affair with the Nazis as it was forced to join World War II. So by World War II, the propaganda machine was really built and oiled. It was ready to go. And World War II presented an opportunity for propaganda to be taken to the next level. They created the Office of War Information, the OWI, in 1942, and the Writers' War Board, WWB, because obviously America have to pretend that they don't like censorship and stuff like this. So these were privately run boards, but the government guided them and funded them. So, you know, and the way it worked is that filmmakers could submit films to this board, and if they liked it, they would get major funding from the American government. I mean, sorry, the privately run business. Yeah. And like, yeah, you could get funding. Just make sure you don't show America as like weak, divided, racist, or imperialistic. Just, you know, go easy on us. Now, obviously, I'm not saying that anti-Nazi propaganda wasn't needed. Of course it was. But by doing this, they had created a precedent in Hollywood. You see, after the OWI was dissolved after the war, government influence into Hollywood didn't disappear. It simply went behind the scenes. What is known as the military entertainment complex created a pipeline between Hollywood and the US military. The military would offer major funding, major access to equipment and locations in return for script approval. So you get films like The Big Lift in 1950, Strategic Air Command, The Bridges of Toko Ri, and this was all the way back in like the 50s, but this pattern would continue. Films like Top Gun in 1986 were funded directly by the Department of Defense, and that film spiked military recruitment by 500%. The Hunt for Red October 1990, Black Hawk Down 2001, Pearl Harbor 2001, and the Transformer series, which was 2007 all the way up to 2018. So as time went past, filmmakers, they were presented with this strange incentive. It wasn't that you couldn't go and grab a camera and tell some very honest story about the complexity of life, critiques of America, but if you want to make a sick film about tanks and guns and blower-uppers, and if you wanted major funding, distribution, you could have all this, my friends. Just make sure you paint America in a really, 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 really good light. And voila, you have a blockbuster hit. But what if new ideas started to spread around the world of what even terms like freedom really mean? What if slowly culture started to change? I just want to quickly take a second, right? Doing this job on YouTube means that I am constantly taking notes, like all the time. I use my phone and it is a disorganized mess. But that's where today's sponsor, PLAUD Note, comes in. An absolute game changer for note taking. This small, sleek device attaches to the back of your phone, and with just literally one click, it starts recording conversation. You can use this whether you're in like a work meeting, in an interview, or like a brainstorming session. So basically, you can be fully engaged in the conversation without having to stop and take notes and pause. Debunking all the key arguments about immigration, but I want it to be funny and sort of like... PLAUD Note captures everything, from full audio to transcribing every word into text, with like a speaker label to distinguish the different voices of who's speaking. What's amazing is it will provide you like a structured summary and like highlight key points from the conversation, which you can go through and read on your phone. The real magic though is Ask AI. You can literally ask it questions about your conversation and extract insights directly from your recordings. PLAUD Note is your AI meeting secretary, learning from your meeting history. If you need help drafting an email, you can ask AI. If you want to pull data for a report, ask AI. It can even help you delegate tasks to your team. As well, the Note won't drain your battery on your phone or take up any storage on your phone. It can record continuously for 30 hours with noise cancellation and voice isolation. Plus, it understands up to 112 different languages and accents. It's ideal for executives, managers, and leaders who want to run efficient meetings and save time on after meeting tasks. Also, you get full privacy. PLAUD meets SOC 2, GDPR, HIPAA, and EN 18031 standards. These are the industry's most secure compliance requirements, ensuring the safest storage and transmission of your data. So be sure to check the links below, use my code Jimmy to enjoy 10% off and get an extra 600 minutes of transcription. Anyway, back to the video. So next time you're in America and like at a bar, just grab an American by the hand and just whisper in their ear and say, healthcare should be free. So if you do this, there's about a sort of 60% chance that they will have an aneurysm. And if they don't immediately die, their heart will race, their lips will quiver, and they will sort of spit at you. Free healthcare? No way, you can't have free healthcare because free healthcare is communism, and communism is evil.
I don't believe that our government should be responsible for providing all of us health care. I do not like the idea of that.
I don't want the government picking what I can and cannot do.
If everybody has something for free, who's going to pay for it?
Anything that's free, sometimes it's not worth having.
So America, right, despite being the only nation, sort of developed nation that doesn't have some form of free healthcare, they seem to have this very unique relationship to the word communism. A relationship that even in the UK, as influenced by Americans as we are, even we don't have the same reaction. And of course, the rest of Europe doesn't either. But this attitude, this fear of communism wasn't an accident. During the Cold War, which was 1947 all the way to 1991, the USSR became a global power. And they were a problem for America. And they didn't just fear them because of the potential of nuclear warfare, but they feared them for the potential that their ideas might spread. Ideas like worker ownership, the power of unions, class solidarity. And this was very, very bad for America. In the late 40s to 50s, the US of A descended into a national meltdown over this fear of communist infiltration. A man by the name of Joseph McCarthy, he built his entire political career over accusing people of being Soviet agents with little to no evidence at all. What's more is McCarthy claimed that the United States government, military, and the media was riddled with communists.
Any man who protects communists is not fit to wear that uniform, General.
The growing menace of communism arouses the House of Representatives un-American.
Are you now under the direction of the Communist Party?
The fight will continue, regardless of how rough the opposition gets, and rough it will be.
The general gist that he tried to put across, that there was these sneaky communist spies everywhere, sort of like hiding in bushes and bins, and they were all plotting to just overthrow America. But like these sneaky spies were sometimes, they were super sneaky, so like they couldn't find them. And so America set up the House Un-American Activities Committee, the HUAC, with the sole duty to weed out communists from every layer of society. You gotta think, right, if you're trying to find these secret communist saboteurs, these spreaders of dangerous thought, well, who was more influential at spreading ideas than Hollywood? The idea that Hollywood was secretly infested with communists who were using the films to spread communist propaganda, all whilst Hollywood was literally, as we've just gone through, were literally funded by the American government and military to promote pro-war and pro-capitalist messages through their films. Nonetheless, right, a load of actors, writers, directors were dragged in front of the HUAC, and they started being blacklisted from Hollywood. Anyone in Hollywood, you know, a creative arts field, who was suspected of being slightly left-wing were fired and not allowed to work ever again. I don't know if you know this, but usually creative people tend to be a little bit left-wing. Writers, actors, directors were having their careers destroyed on literally just allegations. Now, there was no single official law which banned communist thought from Hollywood. However, there didn't need to be. And this created an entire culture of fear across the industry. Collective action, class solidarity, unionizing, any idea that was potentially even perceived as being pro-worker was now being labeled as communist and traitorous to the very foundations of America. So let's just think, right? You're a director and you're thinking of making a film. How likely do you think you're going to use your creative freedoms to express any critique of America, capitalism, the system, or promote workers' rights? Do you think you're going to do it? No. You're much more likely to make a film about some dope fucking boxer bro traveled to Afghanistan and single-handedly took on the Soviet Union.
It's some of the greatest fight stuff I've ever seen filmed.
The media that was being pumped out of Hollywood had a very, very clear set of beliefs and attitudes it started to push into the minds of people. That American capitalism and individualism is the only way. Every problem in life has one individual solution. Every injustice in society can be overcome through grit, faith, and one brave man standing up for what is right. Heroes, villains, and a happy ending. There was no moral grey areas, no mid-grounds, no nuance. There was very little like, you know, hang on guys, why is the bad guy bad in the first place? Maybe the good guy, maybe he's not actually that good, and maybe he's part of a system that perpetuates a certain type. Shut up, you filthy communist. There was this really good video I watched which was comparing American and Chinese political philosophy, where it talks about how Americans have a very vertical philosophy. So they start with a base idea. Freedom is fundamentally good, and this fundamental good should be applied everywhere. You apply it in every situation. The more freedom, the more good. Whether that freedom means that kids have to go to school walking through metal detectors so they don't get shot, you know, is shut up. Freedom, good. This binary way of thinking has such deep cultural effects, not just on America, but also directly onto all of the European markets that Hollywood was selling to. America obviously dominates the entire media world. In as early as 1919, 90% of films shown in Europe, Africa, and Asia were American made. Now, it wasn't just like fair game because like Americans are sick. It was basically just ruthless capitalism. From Thomas Edison just putting loads of patents on film equipment, making it impossible to get films into the American market, to the Americans just coming in and buying out whole film industries, crushing the competition, and just pumping their films all across the world. Britain, Germany, Italy had a really thriving film community. Like after the war, when Europe was rebuilding itself, part of the deal to receiving money from America to repair was to open up its market, especially to American films, because they knew the power of films to sell messages around the world. I'm sure the neoliberal revolution of the 80s could not have been done without some assistance from Hollywood messaging in films. We had a very deep pivot in the way we used to think about society through the 1980s with Thatcher, as we embraced very American ideals. Ideas around like the government being tyrannical, the British socialism that came before it was one singular step away from being Stalin. It tried to reframe society that like big businesses were our saviors.
Mind is an attribute of the individual. There is no such thing as a collective brain. The man who thinks must think and act on his own. The reasoning mind cannot work under any form of compulsion. It cannot be subordinated to the needs, opinions, or wishes of others.
We very specifically moved away from a collectivist attitude towards society, that we're all part of a community and we work together to help everyone, and toward an attitude that we are actually a nation of individuals fighting each other for our slice of the pie.
Greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Greed is right. Greed works.
All of Europe went through this process of like privatization, reducing taxes on the rich, reducing the welfare state. But in much of Europe, leftism is accepted without the instant association with Stalin. Whereas in America, they take someone like a Bernie Sanders, who would be your average European politician, and they see him as a wild, radical communist who will make a dictatorship of America. But this actually particularly affects Britain because like when you look at a politician like Jeremy Corbyn, they sold the same communist sort of Red Scare tactics over him.
Jeremy Corbyn has always attracted support from the far left, but there is support for Jeremy Corbyn even further to the left. The British Communist Party will stand no candidates in this election for the first time since 1920.
But it's interesting, right? Because when you look at America, they sort of struggle to understand the grey area, right? It doesn't have to be a communist dictatorship or free market libertarian extreme capitalism. Obviously, there's lots of mid-ground between that. But in the American mind, and I think Hollywood plays a massive role in this, it's very hard for them to understand it isn't one or the other. It can be somewhere in between. Obviously, I'm not talking about all Americans. There are many Americans that support Bernie Sanders, etc. But there are large parts in the political class and of society that just can't see it this way. And it's interesting when they have to contend with the fact that many European nations have way higher living standards than America, and also nations that they used to be much bigger than are now competitive. These attitudes that America's number one, capitalism's the best, it's the only way. As time goes past and other nations develop and change, they start to contradict this American attitude. And so American politicians have to explain it within this binary way of thinking. You can see it with how Americans often talk about the Chinese success, right? The success of China really goes against what America believes.
China's defaulted with us because if you look at what they're doing with the way they steal our intellectual property, our intellectual rights, I mean, it's crazy what they're doing. I mean, there's like no laws that pertain to them. So you could certainly make a case in a court. What they have done to us is incredible. We don't have, and then they come over and they get state dinners. Okay, we give them state dinners.
And the story goes like this, that China opened up to American trade, American tech firms came to China, and China said, in order for you to access our market, you need to share your technology with us and let us understand it. And the American capitalist firms did so willingly, driven by their desire to make more profit. But if a nation somehow starts to grow and outcompete them, it's because they're just bad guys, not playing by the rules, they're cheating. Which just sounds like any basic Hollywood storyline from the last 100 years. But the reason they have to do this is because if they were to just accept that the Chinese state were involved in business and it was successful, it undermines the American mythology. And due to their relentless propaganda, systems can only be one or the other. One of which is good, American capitalism, and the other, evil, tyrannical communist dictatorships. So now, as I explained earlier, right, America, through the force of legislation, power, and big capital, have been able to dominate the entire global film market. And its films, unlike the sort of indie European filmmakers, were created with a different philosophy: mass production. Studios like Universal, Warner Bros, Paramount, they didn't just make movies and works of art, they built assembly lines. Dedicated screenwriters, on-contract actors, costume warehouses, backlot sets, reusing scripts and recycling plots. This content machine, right, this mass production meant that they could compete on scale. They could just flood markets with films. So the spread of American television and film was able to take the day-to-day life of Americans, their culture, their lifestyle, and make it a part of our lives abroad.
So, Mama, what'd you do? Making dinner.
Like most Europeans, most British people, we understand a lot of American jokes and references, even references to things we may have never been to. If they make a joke about a 7-Eleven, even if you haven't stepped foot in one of them, you'll get what they're talking about. And it would impact you, right? Like, I have definitely called a couch a sofa many times. I think even in my weakest moments, I have called a bin a trash can. Ugh. America wasn't just exporting beliefs and politics, but they were actually painting a mythology about America itself and its history. Films like Gone with the Wind basically whitewashed slavery. They made Confederacy seem like a lost noble cause. Mr. Smith painted American democracy as flawed but ultimately virtuous. Shane told you that violence, when done by the right man with a good moral compass, wasn't just acceptable, that it was necessary.
If a man really wants to protect what's his, he has to do it for himself.
These were moral blueprints that trained the entire world on how to see America and its morality on a global stage, like in a benevolent way. They were always the good guy. And they also exploited an image of the American middle-class paradise. To me, growing up, America was this place where every family had like a massive garden or a lawn, a big swimming pool. They had a porch out the front of their house. They all had double fridges, which were always full, 2 cars, the neighbors were always friendly. But what those films didn't show us was how this middle-class paradise was funded by a massive empire, protected by a military, and built on a society that in reality was deeply segregated and insanely unequal. As these predominantly white families we'd see on the television were moving into these houses with federally subsidized mortgages, at the same time, black Americans were being redlined. They were excluded and confined to very underfunded neighborhoods. For much of this period of time, Jim Crow rules still dominated the South. Lynchings still happened. Native Americans were being displaced, and Latino workers were being exploited. And poor white communities weren't living in this paradise either. Many were just surviving in broken towns on the wrong end of capitalism. But none of that stuff really made it into the TV shows and the films. And when Hollywood did attempt to talk about these things, if they wanted to talk about crime, gangs, and ghettos, they'd usually do it in one or two ways. Either they would simply paint them as like these black criminals who were backwards, lawless, and kind of deserved the conditions they were in. You'd see this in things like Menace to Society, Colors, Training Day, or they would show this poverty as an opportunity to prove themselves. You would see this in 8 Mile, Coach Carter, Freedom Writers. A lot of these are great films, but in both cases, there's never really an explanation of the structural causes of poverty, why they're in this condition in the first place. Poverty is rather just taken as a given and shown to be like a test of someone's personal morality. So when you're this young lad in Britain, right, and you're just snorting up all this American propaganda, you don't really realize that you are being indoctrinated. You watch films like American Sniper and you come away and you just have this attitude that military is heroic, that violence is righteous when it's in the name of freedom, and like dying for your country is the ultimate way to be a man. You see films like Social Network and you're taught that great inventions, the technologies that changed the world, didn't come from a team or communities or collective effort that was built off of major state funding that pumped into R&D for many, many years, but instead, no. The great technology, the great innovators were just one lone genius, misunderstood, emotionally broken, but brilliant enough to reshape the world.
I am not a lizard.
Think about it. In a film like Pursuit of Happiness, you are taught two things, right? That no matter your background, even if you're a homeless black single father living in toilets and shelters, if you just simply work harder than everyone else, you sacrifice your sleep, your dignity, and your son's childhood, one day you'll make it. The amount of films that exonerate businesses, extreme capitalism, and these sort of dog-eat-dog attitudes, they might sort of make it out like rich people are assholes, but they tend to make the life look exciting or cool or aspirational in some way. Many of the films that I've listed or just shown in the video, they are still some of my favorite films. But when you see them at such a rate and it's so continuous, to deny their ability to propagandize people and train them to think in a certain way, to deny that would be naive. So whilst the Hays Code might not exist these days, the OBI shut down, the Nazi market's closed, to this day, the DoD still directly funds American military films, to the very point that they get final approval over the film. Call of Duty isn't directly funded by the military, but they do rub shoulders. And Call of Duty time and time again rewrites pieces of history, real history, and makes Americans out as the good guys rather than when they were the bad guys in reality.
Infinity Ward used this actual highway of death based on the February 25th through 27th, 1991 events where the U.S. Air Force bombarded the Iraqi army leaving Kuwait.
The Russians bombed it during the invasion, killing the people trying to escape. There is a village at the crossroads.
Yeah, the Russians.
And his fighters there to prepare an ambush.
Right.
Alex and I.
Post 9/11 was interesting, right? Because in the 90s, you actually did start to see more films that were a bit more critical of American capitalism. However, when America decided to invade Iraq, Hollywood and the entertainment industry went into pro-war overdrive. Every TV show, every film had an Islamic terrorist promoting this fear that you might be in a terrorist attack, all while showing you these heroic macho soldiers. And even when they wanted to show like the horrors of the Iraq war, they didn't focus on the suffering of Iraqis. They mainly focused on the suffering of American soldiers.
Yeah, she's got a grenade. She's got an RKG Russian grenade. You say it to the kid?
If you're wrong, they send your ass to Leavenworth.
They painted these wars out like they were messy, complicated, bad things happened, but to some degree, they were necessary.
Nice shooting, Tex. Hell of a call. Roger that. Good looking out, Navy.
And even right now, America allows Chinese censorship of its films. Because China is such a big market for Hollywood, they will remove or downplay black and brown people from the films. They'll also remove LGBT scenes.
It's opening day again at this Beijing theater. Neither Sony, which distributed Django Unchained in China, nor the Chinese Film Board would tell us exactly what was changed.
A lot of these giant corporate entities have business with Saudi Arabia or China. So while we're all going, can we say this joke or not say that joke, on a much bigger level, they have just completely shut down critical content about human rights abuses in China. And I think that's much scarier.
So yeah, I think these days people start to see the hypocrisy of Hollywood more and more. And I think a large part is because many of these myths that America sold through Hollywood, they can only sustain for so long because what if Americans stop believing them? Whilst genuinely critical films and television are a bit few and far between, and they might not quite get the Captain America budget, they do happen. They do exist. The Big Short, I mean, if you haven't watched it, definitely watch it. It's one of my favorites. It broke apart why the financial crisis happened due to the greed of bankers and a political class that was just cheering them on. Fight Club, all the way back in 1999, was critiquing American consumerism, capitalism, and like shallow ideas of masculinity. And recently, shows like Painkiller, showing how the privatized American medical system created the opioid crisis. And as a lot of us have grown up in this internet era, these same tools of propaganda are now being repackaged from influencers, algorithms, and entire platforms, where the military sponsors COD streamers and billionaires buy up platforms to stoke culture wars. Propaganda didn't end when the Hays Code was lifted or the Cold War ended. It simply evolved. The same message, but just a new medium. America is good, capitalism works, work harder, shut up, and smile. But you see right now, as like capitalism is morphing into something else and clearly is coming to terms with its own contradictions, where America has amassed more wealth, more billionaires, more millionaires than anyone else on earth ever, and yet there are still people living in terrible conditions in poverty. Their drug problems are crazy, medical bills are insane, and the younger generation are increasingly paying unstable amounts of rent with likely no ability to ever afford a home. America's mythology is becoming unstuck. But we can all see the cracks are widening. We can all see the myths are breaking down. More people are asking questions and starting to realize how American propaganda fried their brain.
Why is America
not the greatest country in the world, Professor? That's my answer. Sure used to be. We stood up for what was right. We fought for moral reasons. We passed laws, struck down laws for moral reasons. We waged wars on poverty, not poor people. We aspired to intelligence. We didn't belittle it. It didn't make us feel inferior. We reached for the stars. We were able to be all these things and do all these things because we were informed by great men, men who were revered. First step in solving any problem is recognizing there is one.
If you enjoyed this video, be sure to jump on the Patreon. You can support me. It massively helps the channel. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.